Welcome to Decision Point. Today our show focuses on veterans and people who are currently in the service and how we can support them best from home. Our guests today are Captain Kevin Burton, who is a chaplain for the U.S. Army, and his wife Laura, and then also Mr. George Ernst, who heads up a whole effort for patriotism and promotion of patriotism here in El Paso. Welcome. And
thank you very much.
We're very happy to have you here today.
Thank you. Good to be here.
Good. Captain Burton, what is the most difficult thing about being deployed and being a soldier out there in a time of war? Perhaps our veterans or people who are here who are currently serving in Iraq. Is that?
Well, let me start with saying this. When you're in the Army, a chaplain is a chaplain regardless of what rank they are.
Right.
All right, so you can have 2 stars on your chest and you're still chaplain.
Okay.
So just call me chaplain. That's what I answer to most anything.
Okay.
But the most difficult thing downrange, I'd have to say, is probably the separation from family.
Right.
You know, you might think a soldier say, well, it's, you know, being in a dangerous place, you know, doing dangerous things, you know, and that is a difficult part of what, you know, a soldier does. But I think one of the most challenging thing is just that year or, you know, year and a half, you know, away from family, away from friends, away from loved ones in a strange place, and that, you know, that's stressful. That's challenging for soldiers.
So, what would a day be like for a soldier? An average day? I mean, surely they're not in battle day in and day out. No. So, what does it feel like to be out there deployed?
Well, again, you know, it depends, too, on where you're deployed. You know, Iraq and Afghanistan are different theaters with different experiences in both locations.
Right.
And the type of unit you're with also plays into, you know, your role in the combat environment. My last deployment, I was with an infantry unit. And, you know, there's days where it's just sheer boredom.
Boredom, huh?
Yeah, but then there's those...
a lot of waiting around and that kind of thing.
Right, but then there's sprinkled over that is those moments of sheer terror. So, you know, it has a good mixture of the two. You know, there's days where, you know, we call it Groundhog Day, where it's like the same day over and over and over again. So, you know, there is some degree of monotony that goes on to the deployed life as well.
And what kind of emotional and spiritual challenges does that bring to the average soldier that you have to minister to out there?
You know, I think one of the very challenging things in deploying to a combat environment is, you know, soldiers all have the understanding when we go to combat that, you know, there's potential for, you know, personal injury or death. But well, my experience there was, you know, I wasn't really prepared, I think, for the degree of personal, you know, of injury and death, and not just to, you know, American soldiers, but to other soldiers as well, or you know, local, you know, police and that sort of thing.
So you're seeing all kinds of individuals being injured or killed, and that's distressing no matter who they are.
Right, exactly. Yeah. And then, you know, having your own, what I like to call a theology of death, grief, and suffering, having, you know, wrapped your mind around that and what that means for you personally before you get there is a wonderful resiliency tool when you come face to face with it.
Now, do you actually do that type of preparation for the soldiers, or is that something that each one of them does personally?
Well, yes and no, because, you know, as a chaplain, we don't force ourselves on anyone, any soldier. You know, it's not like we take a Bible around beating soldiers over the head saying you need to go to church or, you know, believe this way or the other. You know, so typically soldiers will come to a chaplain, and when they come to a chaplain, you know, a lot of them, especially before deployment, do want to explore those issues. You know, hey, chaplain, you know, what are we going to do when we start losing, you know, our buddies? You know, or chaplain, what do you think about, you know, us going to combat and having to, you know, to kill people? You know, and those are difficult questions that soldiers deal with, and thank goodness we got chaplains there to help them through that process. Those who seek that out.
And so, do a large percentage of soldiers seek out a chaplain, or what percentage would you say do you actually end up being able to talk with and minister to?
Well, and there's different settings in that as well. You know, there's intentional counseling where a soldier will say, you know, chaplain, I'd like to come and see you, and you come and sit down in an office. And then there's another, we call it in the chaplain world a ministry of presence, where You know, we go where the soldiers are at. That's one thing I love about being an Army chaplain, because I get to go wherever the soldiers go. You know, I was a pastor for years, and you know, you kind of sit in your, you know, in your church office and, man, I wish my folks would come by. But as an Army chaplain, I get to go where they go.
Right.
You know, I get to live where they live. You know, I work where they work.
So just rubbing shoulders with them day to day.
Being there, doing what they're doing, experiencing what they're experiencing, you know, builds a camaraderie, builds a trust, where even those who may not be spiritually minded, or may not even want to talk about spiritual matters, where it comes, hey, chaplain, this is what I'm struggling with, or this is what's going on in my life. What do you think? What advice do you have for me?
Right. And so from the standpoint of people interacting with the soldiers from home, whether it be their family members or community or what have you, what is the thing that is most encouraging to them? What kinds of things can people be doing that really helps them through those difficult times?
The one thing is communication. I was, you know, deployed to the Balkans in the early 90s, and things were far different then. I mean, I'd spend $300 a month on phone cards so I could call from Croatia back to Germany to talk to my wife. But, you know, and now we have more communication means. You know, in my last deployment, we had internet and phones readily available. So, you know, being able to reach back across those thousands of miles back to home and talk is very encouraging.
So emails, Facebook, is Skype also available?
It is. At my forward operating base, we had an internet provider there that, you know, that we could purchase and utilize there. As a matter of fact, a lot of times, I had a chapel there on my operating base, and a lot of times I'd bring up Skype and put it in the chapel, and my wife could watch the worship service I was conducting in Afghanistan from our living room in Washington. So
that's amazing. Yeah. So that kind of thing really helps a lot.
It does.
To stay in communication as much as possible.
And on the subject of communication, you know, that's a double-edged sword. It's wonderful to be able to reach back and talk to family and friends back home, but then it also, with that comes all kinds of challenges, because you know, the more informed you are, the more concerns you may have, which, you know, it could be distracting.
Far cry from World War I and Korea and so forth, where the only communication was a letter.
That is true. That is true.
Yeah, and so that was a whole different ballgame, wasn't it?
Yeah, communication in those days was rare.
Right. Yeah. So, what kinds of things distress the soldiers when they either get or don't get communication? What kind of things do you have to deal with?
Well, an uninformed soldier is a stressed soldier. You know,
so lack of communication is a really big one.
Right. But then, as I mentioned earlier, it has its complications as well, because nothing's more frustrating for a soldier than to get news from home, whether it be an email or a phone call, that, hey, you know, the plumbing's out in the house and there's nobody there to fix it. You know, the soldier with all of his being is saying, I wish I was there, I could take care of this. And then, you know, he's got this stress and strain of wondering, you know, how do we take care of, you know, broken plumbing issues at home when I'm, you know, 4,000 miles away.
So from the standpoint of the spouse at home, the question is, is there a good way and a bad way to be communicating? Are there some principles that we need to learn here?
One thing I tell my soldiers before they deploy is, when you have the opportunity to communicate, be intentional about it, especially phone conversations. Because typically, you know, the way it goes is, you know, a soldier gets on the phone with his, you know, family or friends, and they're like, well, I miss you, and I miss you too, and I wish you were home. Yeah, I wish I was home. You know, they waste like 5 minutes of the conversation stating the obvious.
Right.
You know, so, you know, I tell them to be intentional about your conversations.
So you would say the same thing to the person who's at home to maybe make notes or a list of things to talk about? Right,
and be selective of what you share with one another. You know, does the soldier downrange need to know about some of the challenges you're facing at home? Some of them, by all means, yes. Others, maybe not so. And the same thing for the soldier downrange. You know, do they need to share all the gory details of what the deployment is like? Well, no, not really. But there is some things that need to be shared. So finding that balance in communication.
What kinds of things should be shared? What kinds of things shouldn't be shared? If you were going to give some tips to people at home.
I think that all boils down to the two people who are communicating. Strength of relationship, you know, time together, you know, so that's an ever-shifting variable there.
So problems with the kids, what would you say?
I guess my question would be, you know, whether you're downrange or whether you're at home, ask yourself the question, what am I seeking to get out of putting forth this information?
Okay, well that's a good mindset to have. Okay.
Because just to unload a difficult situation on somebody, it may be that you need to vent, but is that the appropriate venue to vent?
So if someone needed to vent from home, then can they seek out services on base or family or church family or what have you, as more appropriate venue for venting types of things?
Right, and I think that you hit the nail right on the head. There are avenues for that. But there are some decisions that need to be made, during deployments, whether you're at home or you're downrange in Iraq and Afghanistan. And of course, you've got to have the freedom to ask those questions and pose those challenges and discuss them. But again, I think I'd go back to what am I seeking to gain from this conversation? What is the purpose of my communicating this message?
What about people who are single parents who are deployed? How does that work?
That is a challenge. And there are, God bless them, there are soldiers across the Army that do this all the time.
Right.
And they will deploy, and they'll have a family care plan.
What is a family care plan?
A family care plan is a plan that every soldier must have for their family in the event that we've got to go to war. So and a lot of times, especially for single parents, it's grandparents, aunts, uncles, friends that they've got an agreement with, an arrangement with, to care for their children while they're downrange.
And so those people then are the ones that would have to be doing the communicating if they're if the children are minors, so to speak,
Right.
with
and
the
which
soldier.
It's very stressful on those single parents who are deployed, because for those of us who are married, I know my children are back home with my wife, and I'm able to communicate with her. We've been married almost 25 years. I know what to expect. But with grandparents or friends or other relatives watching your children, you don't. How far do you impose? How far do you go with the request that you have for them? Which adds another degree of stress, I think, to that deployment.
Right. Now, from the standpoint of the spouse at home, what are some of the challenges that spouses face while their loved ones are deployed?
Mainly just being alone all of a sudden. You have that soldier that walks in the door every night and all of a sudden he's gone. He's not walking through the door. And depending on the age of your children, ours are teenagers now, so when he left, they said, it didn't bring that big of a void. They missed their dad, but they understood where he was at and what he was doing. Now, for a lot of my friends who had younger children, sometimes where's daddy all the time, every day, or maybe 10 or 15 times a day, became overwhelming for those women that went through that.
So the younger children, it's just a much more emotional reaction.
Right.
They just miss mom or dad. They want mom or
Right.
dad, and this concept of them being somewhere doing something for their country is irrelevant.
And then you have babies who can't speak at all, that can't say anything, but they know something's different in the home. They even say that with pets, they do the same thing, but I guess babies would be similar to that they can't really say how they're feeling, but maybe cry a lot more, or at night have a hard time sleeping.
So what about children who are younger? Did you had your children were younger when your husband was deployed also, right?
The first time.
How do you deal with that? And how do you certainly have a lot of friends who are also in the same situation? How do they deal with that? What are some of the strategies that they use to cope?
I think just taking it one day at a time, not thinking about the big picture, not thinking, something could happen to my spouse, their father or mother, trying to just take it one day at a time. What am I going to do today to let them know that mom or dad still loves them, even though they're so far away? And when our children were younger and he deployed, we painted, we did all sorts of things. The care packages were huge. I think even just his last deployment when the kids were older, it was like, what can we go to the store and buy and pile in that box, and how full can we get it? What can we do to show our love to him so that, when he opens that package, he knows we're thinking about him. And it's
so sending care packages regularly is an important part of what
and
you
soldiers
do.
love care packages. Yes,
Great.
And
it's great to get mail.
And I think it made me feel connected to him. You know, even though I knew it was probably going to take 2 weeks for him to get it, I knew and could anticipate that day when he'd call me on Skype or send me an email and say, hey, I got this care package. You know, and it just, and some people would do it together. Our battalion sometimes would get together and load up care packages for different holidays or whatever, and that way we even sent like Christmas lights and Christmas trees and, all, and things for him to decorate his chapel or for them to decorate their little work area, and it just made us feel connected to them.
So anything that people can do like that is a tangible way to help children, spouses, feel connected and part of what's going on, and then it blesses the people who are there too. It's a big deal.
And we also created a calendar. I made him a calendar that every month had all kinds of different pictures. There's just so many things you can do nowadays, and he had that there. And then I guess when it got down to about the last month, I had created a little chain at my work just to help me through the day, because you know, when the battle's raging over there, you're just thinking one more day and he'll be home, or one more week or whatever, and it just helps you get through it.
Right. What about church families and friends? How can they support you in what you're doing, and how can we support people who are deployed? What can we do specifically?
I would say the church family and the friends probably become almost more important than sometimes family, because they're right there with them. So your friends become your family. I mean, Christmas, I didn't even go home because I felt like I couldn't leave my friends who were going through that same thing. And I think, you know, the church family, being there, supporting them, showing way, you know, giving gifts or inviting them to something at Thanksgiving or Christmas, just to make sure they have a place to go.
So, for example, Thanksgiving's coming up in a little bit here, and one thing would be not to assume that military families have a place to go, but to at least issue that invitation and make sure that they have a place to go, or maybe several places to choose from, and are included in the whole day of celebration, so it feels like a family environment.
And that's very important what you said. Whether they accept the invitation or not, it lets them know that, hey, we're thinking about you. You know, they may have some place to go, but especially those deployed families, because you know, at Fort Bliss right now we have 2 brigades of soldiers who are deployed. So there's a lot of people in our community who are without their spouse. So, you know, if you know of a deployed family, you know, reach out and invite them to dinner. Volunteer to watch their kids for a while, and that's another huge thing, because the spouse who's left behind, who has the children, has them 24/7 unless they're in school. But so providing that little bit of downtime where they can go hang out and have adult conversations, you know, and that sort of thing.
Or even just offering, I'll come to your house if you'd like to go out a little bit later when your kids are sleeping, so you don't feel the stress of leaving them. Or how about I come get your kids and you can just lay around the house, you know, just different things that make them know that you care. So
it's those little tangible things that make a big difference.
Oh yes, very sure. And it makes a difference downrange too, because when a soldier knows that the family back home is safe and healthy and taken care of, then they can worry about the business at hand. But where it gets complicated with soldiers in combat is when they have the stresses and strains of combat, plus worrying about how things are going at home. You know.
Yeah. Now, George, you have a special program that you like to promote that encourages our show of patriotism and support for our soldiers and veterans and that kind of thing. You want to tell us a little bit about what it is?
Well, we have several programs, but one is a flag program that you're aware of. And, and we distribute flags through the use of non-profit organizations, Boy Scouts and many others. And, and we're trying to make this the most patriotic city in the country by doing this on the holidays. And there are a number of other organizations that are helping us do this as well. It's too long to express at this moment. But
and you do some education too, right?
Well, that's right. And we have a phone number if people want the flags.
Okay, we'll put that up.
Yeah, and put that up and run it if you will. And I think you did that previously. And,
Sure.
And do that again. But apart from that, I would have the question, is there anything that you can think about, and maybe you don't have an answer at this moment, but what can the El Paso community do more to assist you in the circumstances that we're under here, where we have continual rotation, and it's been protracted for too many years, but I think it's necessary that we continue to be where we are, and because I don't want us fighting a war here. I want to fight the war overseas someplace.
Right.
And we get a disagreement on that sometimes, but I think what we're doing is commendable, and I think it needs to be continued. But in the meantime, is there anything that can be done by the El Paso community as a whole to assist you in the problems that you go through each and every day when you're not here? Think about that. And
I was thinking about the school system.
What about that?
Just being there for those children that are going through deployments and military moves and that sort of thing. You know, teachers can tell when those kids are struggling because they know them. They see them day to day, and just maybe reaching out and saying, you know, I hear your parent is deployed right now. What can we do? Or, you know, I'm not asking for special favors, so to speak, but just to let them know that they're loved and cared for, and that it's kind of understood, because there's military children all over this community and all the schools. So. Not just in maybe a military post, but they're all over, you know.
Right.
And I think one of the important things is that sense of community, because we have El Paso, we have Fort Bliss, you know, we have this is a community, and to some degree an international community, you know. And the more sense of community we have, I think the healthier we'll be as a community. You know, we're not soldiers on Fort Bliss; we're part of the El Paso community. You know, and even events such as this, where we've got civilians, we've got military talking about issues that face our city, with soldiers, because we've lived here a long time, and I think El Paso has a wonderful, wonderful relationship with Fort Bliss, and just being able to have an open forum where we can sit down and discuss this. Hey, we've got soldiers deployed, programs such as this where we can communicate to our city. Hey, there's thousands of soldiers who are deployed right now. Be on the lookout for those families. That's a wonderful way to be supportive, because the Army is a wonderful organization. It provides so much for soldiers and family members. Have so much resources, so many programs. I mean, there's a lot there within the Army community
in terms of training, counseling,
support
of all kinds. There is a lot.
Agencies of all kinds. But to be a healthy individual, you need to be a part of a community, and that's why being a part of your local community, being part of a local church, those are vitally important things in any community, so that you can get that love, care, and support.
What about the soldiers who come home? What's it like to come home after a year deployment? What emotionally is it like? How does it feel? It's hard to imagine after being in a war theater and then coming home like that.
And that is a difficult transition for a lot of soldiers, because unlike our brother here, when he came back from war, most of those guys were on a boat for a few months before they, from the time they left combat to the time they arrived back with normal people. With us, it's 24, 48 hours,
Right.
So you go from combat to
not a lot of
civilian,
transition
just
time,
like
right.
that.
Yeah.
And sometimes that's a difficult transition, especially for those who've lost friends downrange, and you're coming home and they're not there.
Many would be in that boat, right?
And how do
most people do.
How do you be happy about coming home when your buddy didn't?
Right.
You
And
see
facing that
the
family.
wife
Yeah.
of your friend who gave his life in combat, standing there when you come home. And should I be happy? Should I be sad? What should I feel? And also, there's that, and what causes a lot of problems with soldiers is they come back, from combat looking to have everything just like it was before they left, and that normal doesn't exist anymore. Not that you're abnormal, but you're looking for a new normal. What is my new normal, after combat?
How do I step back in and be mom or dad when I haven't been for, you know, you really haven't. You
Right.
haven't been in their presence for a year.
Right.
Very difficult.
What kinds of things can people do to help ease that transition?
I think one of the key things is make changes slowly. The spouse has been downrange, you know, the first week back is not the time to turn over the disciplinary reins and say, okay, I've been a disciplinarian for a year, now it's your turn.
Right.
No, you've got to ease back into that. Change roles slowly. Assume your new roles slowly. Communicate constantly. Make decisions together. Because the spouse who's been at home, he or she is a pro at running the household without you now. All right? So you've got to understand that they've been in that role
Tread
for a
lightly.
while. So exactly. Don't come back in and start giving orders and changing everything because they're like, hey, this was working well without you for a year.
Right.
We don't need you to come in and change everything.
Right.
So making those changes slowly.
How about the community and the church? How can individuals who are not part of the family still support and ease that transition? What can we do?
I know one of the great things when I came back was the community celebrations of troops returning home. And not to be negative, but we've been at this war for a long time, 10 years now. In the early days, when troops returned home, there's big celebrations, and not that they're not anymore, but they don't get the significance that they used to.
Right.
And I'm just recognizing those troops' service because even today in the 10th year, I think so far this year we've lost somewhere around 400 soldiers, so we're still losing, over a soldier a day in what's going on. So recognize what they've done, where they've been, and celebrate, their return home.
So
as a community,
little
not
celebration parties, church celebration parties, friends, family, that kind of thing. Just celebrating, being
host
home.
a spaghetti dinner for returning troops, or
Right.
Or take a
pancake
meal to their
breakfast.
home
Right.
and, give them just a break.
Right. Yeah. Well, we're out of time. It has been such a pleasure to talk with you, and we want to challenge you to think about what you can do, what little thing can you do to support our troops who are either deployed or returning home. Thank you so much for watching.